Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into some source material that really pulls back the curtain on what building a company feels like.
Yeah, especially when things are really going wrong.
Exactly. We've got excerpts here from Ben Horowitz's, well, incredible book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
That's right. And if you're looking for, a glossy step-by-step guide to success, this this really isn't it.
No, not at all.
This book and our deep dive today, it's all about the messy, sometimes terrifying, gut-wrenching challenges of leadership.
Drawn from his direct experience, right, in the trenches.
Absolutely, from the front lines.
And that's exactly why it's so valuable, I think. Our mission here is to extract the most, well, potent nuggets of wisdom, the surprising insights, maybe.
Yeah, and the raw truth about navigating those moments when, frankly, there are just no good options.
Okay, let's get into it. So the book opens with a look at Horowitz's pretty unique childhood, Berkeley, California.
Which he fondly calls the People's Republic of Berkeley.
Right. And it really wasn't your typical suburban upbringing, was it?
Oh, far from it. He talks about his grandparents being like actual card-carrying communists,
Wow.
which was a huge deal back then, especially during the McCarthy era. It actually cost his grandfather his teaching job.
Jeez. And his father grew up in that world.
Yeah, a red diaper baby, as they apparently called it. He later became a pretty prominent figure in the New Left, editing Ramparts magazine.
So a really heavy political, intellectual environment to grow up in.
Definitely. And against that backdrop, he describes himself as this incredibly shy kid.
Yeah, he got kicked out of nursery school for crying.
Non-stop crying. Can you imagine? Just sent home soaking wet. He credits his mother's immense patience.
She resisted pressure for, like, psychiatric treatment.
Exactly. Just let him navigate his shyness on his own timeline. He thinks that's why he eventually managed to go to school at all. That patience is really striking.
It really is. Feels like an early, quiet lesson in meeting people where they are.
Uh-huh.
And speaking of meeting people, there's this really vivid story from when he was 5, moving to Bonita Avenue.
Right, this street with all sorts of people, artists, academics, people struggling.
And his older brother's friend, Roger, who they later learned suffered from schizophrenia.
Yeah, Roger gave him this terrible dare involving another kid, Joel Clark Jr., and a red wagon. Used a racial slur Horowitz had never even heard.
And Horowitz just froze, terrified of Roger, terrified of the other kid, just, completely overwhelmed.
That fight or flight thing.
Totally. And what came out was this unexpected, almost like absurd question.
Can I ride in your wagon?
Right. And Joel Clark Jr., the kid he was supposed to confront, just said,
Sure.
yeah. Roger disappeared, and Joel became his best friend for life. His best man, even.
It's such a powerful story about facing fear, even clumsily, and how it can just reroute everything, create unexpected connections.
Absolutely. And you see that theme, facing fear, pop up again in high school.
Uh-huh. He was an excellent student, but decided to play football.
In Berkeley, which he says frowned upon football as being too militaristic, so definitely not the expected path.
Exactly. He hadn't played before either. He explicitly connects it back to those earlier lessons in dealing with fear.
Right. He says in high school football, handling fear is like 75% of the game.
You have to run towards a collision, not away.
It also threw him into a totally different social world.
Yeah, being a serious football player in the highest academic math track.
Meant he was navigating drastically different perspectives. He talks about the wildly different reactions to Run DMC's Hard Times album.
Between his football buddies and his calculus class friends, yeah.
Or how they viewed Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars.
That experience exposed him really early to how different groups see the same thing in profoundly different ways, which is, crucial for leadership later.
Totally. Understanding those diverse perspectives. Okay, so fast forward past Columbia University. We get to a really pivotal personal story. The blind date with his future wife, Felicia Wiley.
And this is more than just a cute story, right? It signals a necessary shift in his priorities.
Definitely. He and his friend planned this whole elaborate dinner, cooked 4 perfect T-bone steaks.
Ready for 7 p.m.
And their dates were hours late.
Hours.
And his reaction on the phone to Felicia was, well, notoriously blunt.
Well, it is late because you are late.
Huh. Yeah. But then he appealed to her empathy. Pointed out they'd spent all day cooking.
Basically said anything less than coming over immediately would just be plain rude.
And somehow, that bluntness, plus the empathy appeal, it worked.
She came over.
Huh.
And, as he says, became his wife and best friend.
The book adds this really insightful bit about a later conversation, though. He realized he was trying to prioritize everything: career, hobbies, friends, family.
But in practice, he was putting himself first.
Yeah, a joke about flowers being cheap but divorce being expensive kind of hit home.
Oof.
He realized he was running out of time to make real choices, risked losing what mattered most.
It forced him to see things beyond his own desires.
Mm.
He says he had to stop being a boy and become a man.
Which meant consciously putting the people he cared about most first. A life lesson, really, not just business.
Absolutely fundamental.
So from there, he lands at Netscape, read about it, decided instantly he had to interview.
And there's that great little anecdote about the recruiter telling Felicia he probably wouldn't get the job.
Right, because he didn't have a Stanford or Harvard MBA.
Proves the gatekeepers aren't always right. The actual hiring manager saw something else.
And he got the job. Played a key role there, too. Strategic fight against Microsoft.
Developing Netscape's sweet spot. Acquiring companies.
And pushing through that landmark deal with Informix, a much cheaper alternative to Microsoft's stuff.
Yeah, he was right in the thick of a really high-stakes battle there.
Which really sets the stage for the next major chapter. Co-founding LoudCloud with Mark Andreessen in 1999.
And the name itself is kind of a piece of history, isn't it?
Loud and loud, yeah. And apparently one of the first times cloud was used for computing infrastructure like that.
They were really pioneering, and initially just immense excitement.
Booking $27 million in new contracts in less than 9 months.
Yeah, Horowitz describes feeling like they were building the greatest business of all time. That kind of euphoria.
But it was so short-lived. The book details the sudden, just brutal impact of the dot-com crash.
NASDAQ peaked March 2000, fell 10% fast, then just plummeted by April.
A total market implosion.
Startups lost value overnight,
Yeah.
became dot bombs. Horowitz shares that story trying to raise money.
Where the investor told him he must be smoking crack.
Yeah. That really captures the complete shift in mood, just disbelief.
Yet, even in that insane environment, he holds on to this key principle for private funding. The market of one.
Right. You don't need everyone to say yes. You just need one investor. Ignore the rest.
And they found that one investor managed to raise a Series C round at a high valuation.
Valuing the company highly, yeah. Brought in $120 million. Looked like they had runway.
They were forecasting $100 million in sales for the next quarter.
But the reality hit hard. They only booked $37 million.
Horowitz realized the implosion was far more catastrophic than we had predicted.
And just 6 months after raising $120 million.
With 477 employees depending on him.
They were unfundable. That's it. That's the moment you drop into what he calls the struggle.
So facing bankruptcy, no private investors willing to touch them. They're left with one, frankly, terrifying option.
Try to go public.
Huh.
In a market that hated tech stocks.
And Horowitz presented all the logical arguments against an IPO to the board. He laid it all out.
Sales processes weren't ready. Forecasting was impossible. Customers going bankrupt, losing massive amounts of money.
Operations weren't sound, just not prepared for public scrutiny.
He made the case.
But then came that famous, just brutal exchange with Bill Campbell, the legendary coach.
Horowitz, maybe hoping for another way out, said something like, "It's not the money.
And Bill just cut him off.
It's the fucking money."
That was it. The decision was made. They had to go public, needed the cash to survive.
There was literally no other move left on the board.
And the IPO process itself sounds like a nightmare. Their business model. 2-year contracts, but revenue recognized monthly.
Meant revenue lagged way behind actual sales bookings. So they had tiny trailing revenue.
Yeah.
$1.94 million over 6 months.
But we're forecasting this huge leap to $75 million next year. A really steep projection.
Try selling that to skeptical investors in a crash. Plus, giant losses.
Complicated stock option rules making the losses look 4 times larger on paper.
And just relentless negative press questioning if they could even survive.
The deck was totally stacked against them.
And then, the kicker. Just weeks before the IPO.
They discovered $27.6 million of the cash they thought they had wasn't actually available.
It was restricted, tied up in real estate commitments, leaving them with
3 weeks of cash.
3 weeks. Horowitz quotes Scott Kupor asking, "Can you believe they underwrote the deal and didn't notice that the cash was restricted until now?"
Just highlights the absolute chaos and panic they were dealing with. The roadshow itself sounds like, well, a descent into hell.
Stock market crashing daily. Tech stocks were complete pariahs.
Horowitz describes investors looking like they'd just come from torture chambers.
Asking things like, "Why are you here? Do you have any idea what's going on in the world?" Just bewildered.
He was utterly convinced they were going to fail.
And right in the middle of this professional nightmare, he gets a call. personal struggle crashing in.
His father-in-law, John Wiley, a man who'd overcome incredible hardship himself.
Yeah. Father murdered, abused, walked for days to escape, fought in Korea. A man who understood deep struggle.
That man called Horowitz during the road show the day after Felicia had a severe allergic reaction, stopped breathing.
And they hadn't told him because he was busy and in trouble at work.
The weight of that, just unimaginable.
Yes, Felicia, should I come home?
Her response was just clear, brutal, necessary.
No, get the IPO done. There is no tomorrow for you and the company.
Ooh. Just imagine trying to finish that road show after hearing that, trying to convince people to give you money.
He describes being completely discombobulated, showing up in a mismatched suit, not knowing where he was.
Meanwhile, the market kept falling. Comparable companies lost half their value.
Their target IPO price of $10 was suddenly double the benchmark. The bankers recommended dropping it to $6.
And the book marks the moment, signifying the absolute bottom for tech sentiment.
Yahoo CEO Tim Kugel, leader of the internet's flagship company, stepped down the day before their offering.
Felt like the whole era was just collapsing around them.
They ultimately sold the IPO at $6, raised $162.5 million.
But the book says there was no celebration and no party, not even the standard closing dinner.
Horowitz calls it the least celebratory IPO in history.
And the mood was just perfectly captured by Scott Kupor's line on the plane home.
Yeah, but we're still fucked.
Years later, Felicia remembered his despair over Tim Kugel's firing. Just highlights how deeply that low point hit him, even amidst his own chaos. And the struggle was absolutely far from over, after they eventually sold the LoudCloud managed services business to EDS.
Investors started dumping shares, just getting out.
The stock plummeted to $0.35. 35 cents.
And that price is significant. Their market cap, the total value of all shares, was half the cash they had in the bank.
Which is a clear signal from investors, right?
Totally. They're saying the core business has zero value, and they expect the company to just burn through its cash until it's gone.
They also faced a NASDAQ delisting threat, needed the stock price above $1 for 90 days.
And Horowitz decided against a reverse stock split. Felt it would be seen as capitulation, just validating that rock-bottom price.
He needed help, got connected to Herb Allen, a key relationship mentioned in the book.
Right. And the EDS contract itself, their supposed lifeline, brought its own huge challenges.
Horowitz describes an insane, chaotic environment at EDS. Old tech, unmotivated people.
Frustrating product bugs, stopping their deployments, just a mess.
He shares this great example of how he tried to navigate it, though. Gave 2 directives to his leads at EDS.
Jason was told to deliver the expected value, which Horowitz knew would likely fail given the environment.
And Anthony was tasked with finding exciting value, something EDS didn't expect but secretly really wanted.
This led Anthony to discover that a key person at EDS, Frank Johnson, desperately wanted this software called Tangram.
Despite internal procurement hurdles at EDS making it hard for him to get it.
So Horowitz made this incredibly bold, counterintuitive decision.
His team did due diligence on Tangram Enterprise Solutions, found it was difficult technology, old, losing money.
The findings were unanimously negative. Don't buy it.
But Horowitz writes, I listened, and then I told them all that I didn't care about any of that. We were going to buy Tangram for $10 million.
Wow. Cussy.
And this move changed everything. They provided Tangram free to Frank Johnson.
Which completely transformed Frank's view of their work. They started weighing proofs of concept, getting a chance to show their software worked.
Something they couldn't do before. It opened doors.
The emotional weight of this comes out years later. Horowitz read a note from Ted Crossman describing the huge impact that Tangram deal had.
It made him cry, realizing he hadn't fully grasped how much it meant at the time.
This experience led to a simple but profound realization for him.
It's a good idea to ask, what am I not doing?
Right. Sometimes the solution isn't fixing what's broken, but finding what essential piece is missing.
Eventually, Opsware, the renamed company, did turn around, reached a $150 million annual revenue run rate.
Stock price climbed to $68, market cap over $800 million, a remarkable recovery.
But, as the book makes clear, the challenges didn't just vanish. Rapid market changes, virtualization, shareholder activists.
The struggle evolves, maybe, but it rarely disappears entirely.
And that brings us right to the core concept Horowitz introduces, the struggle.
He defines it as that period when nothing is easy and nothing feels right. when you feel like you've just dropped into the abyss.
And he's really upfront. There's no single secret to being a successful CEO or entrepreneur.
No magic bullet.
Yeah.
But if there's a key skill, it's the ability to focus and make the best move when there are no good moves.
Especially when your instinct is just to hide or give up.
He points out, most management books focus on avoiding mistakes,
His book, he says, is for after you've already screwed up.
which is pretty much a guaranteed state for anyone building something new. It's about navigating the unavoidable messes.
Okay, one crucial and frankly pretty counterintuitive management lesson he shares is about overcoming the pressure to always be positive.
Yeah, there's this idea, he calls it the positivity delusion. The CEO must project absolute confidence, shield employees from bad news.
To keep morale up. Right.
Right. But Horowitz argues this is deeply wrong.
Why? What's the reasoning?
Because, surprisingly, employees often handle bad news and losses better than the founder CEO.
He realized I was the one married to the company. If things went horribly wrong, they could walk away, but I could not. He had the most to lose.
The pressure to maintain that positive facade is huge, but he argues the best approach is stand up to it. Face your own fear.
And tell it like it is.
Exactly. Honesty, even with bad news, builds trust in the long run. People can handle the truth.
Building on that idea of hard truths, he shares a pretty sobering fact from venture capitalist Doug Leone.
Which is that companies rarely recover from consecutive layoffs.
Yet Opsware famously recovered from 3 rounds of layoffs and terrible press to achieve that $1.6 billion outcome.
Something Leone called a complete violation of the laws of venture capital physics.
So how did they defy the odds? Horowitz details a critical step for executing layoffs properly.
Be absolutely clear about why you are laying people off.
And the reason isn't individual performance issues.
No, it's because the company failed to hit its plan. The message has to be direct.
The company failed, and in order to move forward, we will have to lose some excellent people.
Admitting company failure is key. It sounds counterintuitive taking the blame like that.
But it reinforces trust with the people who remain. They see you being honest. Another really painful test of leadership: firing an executive.
Horowitz frames this as a key indicator of whether a company truly runs well. How you handle this.
And he gets right to the painful root cause. Often, the issue isn't just the executive's incompetence.
It's the CEO's poor hiring or integration process. He puts it so bluntly.
Yes, the reason that you have to fire your head of marketing is not because he sucks. It's because you suck.
Ouch. Meaning, you made the bad hire or didn't set them up properly for success.
He talks about bad advice leaders get, too, like hiring someone for scale way too early.
When what you really need is someone good for the next 18 months, regardless of whether they can manage a giant organization later.
And there are challenges with the board, right? Especially if it's the 5th exec fired, 3rd in this role.
And maybe this person was referred by a board member.
You have to choose. Alarm the board now, or let a critical department just wither away later.
He shares crucial advice he got from Bill Campbell during one of these tough times.
What was that?
You cannot let him keep his job, but you absolutely can let him keep his respect.
Okay, so how do you do that?
He suggests letting the executive decide how the news is communicated. Give them some control over the narrative, preserve their dignity.
And the communication process itself matters immensely.
Inform direct reports first, then staff, then the rest of the company, all on the same day. Avoid rumors.
He also recommends the CEO step into the role temporarily.
Yeah, provides continuity and helps you learn what's really needed for the next hire. You get direct insight.
Even harder, maybe, than firing someone you hired is having to demote or restructure a loyal friend.
Someone who worked incredibly hard, but just lacks the necessary experience as the company grows and the role changes.
Horowitz acknowledges there's just no way to paint a picture of him reporting to his new boss as anything but a demotion. It's a painful reality.
He suggests an alternative, if possible. Move the friend to a different area where their skills fit better, where they can develop new ones.
So they can still contribute meaningfully.
Right, but he's honest. Nothing you say will completely remove the sting of that conversation.
Your goal isn't to make it feel good.
No, it's to be honest, clear, and effective. Over time, that honesty is usually appreciated.
Horowitz also talks about something he calls lies that losers tell.
He observes that companies losing battles often sacrifice the truth first. They create these elaborate stories.
Creative narratives.
Yeah, to avoid the difficult facts, like blaming lost deals on competitors, giving it away.
Instead of admitting their own product or sales process wasn't good enough.
It's a way of avoiding reality, running away when you should be confronting the problem and fighting to fix it.
He poses this really stark, provocative question that forces you to confront it.
If our company isn't good enough to win, then do we need to exist at all?
Wow, that's heavy.
It is. And he brings in the nobody cares principle from the legendary football coach Al Davis.
Just win, baby.
The point being, all the energy spent elaborating on your misery, blaming others, dwelling on what could have been, it's wasted.
Nobody outside cares about your excuses.
Right. You need to channel all your energy into finding that one seemingly impossible way out of the mess you're in. Just run your company.
A philosophy that guided him came from his old boss at Netscape, Jim Barksdale.
A really deep saying. We take care of the people, the products, and the profits, in that order.
And Horowitz stresses that taking care of people, that's the hardest part.
But also the most important. Because if you don't do that well, the other two, products and profits, they won't matter in the long run.
Okay, so what does taking care of people mean in practice? What does building a good place to work actually look like?
He defines it pretty clearly. It's a place where employees can actually focus, where they trust that doing good work leads to good outcomes for them and for the company.
Where work feels efficient, effective, makes a difference.
And is ultimately motivating and fulfilling, not just a paycheck.
He shares this really humbling story about discovering one of his managers hadn't had one-on-one meetings with his team.
For 6 months, despite Horowitz having trained him and made it a clear expectation.
And his mistake, he realized.
He told the manager what to do, have the one-on-ones, but he didn't clearly explain why it was important.
Authority alone wasn't enough to make the manager prioritize it.
He learned that management training isn't just about processes. It's about conveying the purpose behind them. Why does this matter?
And he argues that being a good company isn't just, a nice to have. It's essential for survival when things inevitably go wrong.
Which they always do.
It's also, he says, an end in itself. He holds up Bill Campbell as the ultimate example.
Right. Even if you do nothing else, be like Bill and build a good company.
This connects directly to another point that feels counterintuitive, especially for lean startups, the value of training your employees.
Yeah, he uses the McDonald's analogy. We expect minimum wage employees at McDonald's to be thoroughly trained, right?
Of course.
But we often assume really smart people in complex startup jobs somehow don't need formal training.
Which doesn't make sense when you put it like that. You wouldn't want the untrained person making your Big Mac.
Exactly. He shares the impact of the good product manager, bad product manager document he created back at Netscape.
Instantly clarified expectations, improved team performance, because everyone finally understood what good looked like.
And he links training directly to retention. After money, the top 2 reasons people quit.
Hating their manager.
Often due to lack of guidance, feedback, development.
And not learning anything.
Right, feeling like the company isn't investing in their skills. Outstanding training addresses both issues head-on.
He distinguishes between functional training job skills and management training.
Teaching managers how to set expectations, do good one-on-ones, give effective feedback.
And he insists the CEO has to teach the management expectations course.
Themselves, because they are their expectations. You can't just delegate that core message about how we manage people here.
He tackles the biggest obstacle, we don't have time, with that memorable quote.
Being too busy to train is the moral equivalent of being too hungry to eat.
It's great. Training isn't a time sink. It directly improves productivity and builds the culture you want. Speaking of people, he also tackles the difficulty of hiring from a friend's company.
Acknowledges its tricky territory. Hiring one great person can lead to others following.
Which can definitely strain the friendship. He notes the friend will forgive, but rest assured, she will not forget.
Yeah, it's a cost you have to weigh carefully.
He also details what he calls dangerous mismatches when hiring big company executives into a startup.
First, the rhythm mismatch. Big companies often move slower, wait for consensus.
Startups require rapid doing, deciding, iterating.
Then the skill set mismatch. Running a large established org is very different from building something from scratch.
He advises screening for these in interviews. Maybe ask, what will you do in your first month?
And be wary of answers focused purely on learning and analyzing for too long. Integration is also crucial.
He saves particular scorn for what he calls the scale anticipation fallacy.
This is that idea of evaluating executives based on whether you think they can manage the company years from now when it's much bigger.
He argues this is deeply flawed because managing at scale is a learned skill rather than a natural ability.
And it's almost impossible to judge that in advance.
Trying to predict if someone can scale corrupts your ability to evaluate if they can do the job today.
It hinders their development and often means you pass up good executives for worse ones by focusing on this theoretical future ability.
His conclusion is just definitive.
Predicting whether an executive can scale corrupts your ability to manage is unfair and doesn't work. Focus on the job now and near term.
Horowitz highlights several common management pitfalls, too. One is employees misinterpreting a manager's intent.
Sometimes leading to getting exactly what you asked for, literally, but not what you actually wanted.
He cites examples like flattening a sales hockey stick forecast sounded good, but reduced total revenue.
Or HP divisions sacrificing long-term R&D for short-term numbers because the metrics incentivized only that.
He contrasts managing the black box, just looking at the output numbers, with managing the white box.
Understanding how those numbers are produced, including the inputs, like R&D or process improvements that impact the future. The white box view is essential.
A major problem he calls out, having two people in the same job, like two heads of engineering.
Leads to decision paralysis, confusion, no clear accountability, organizational decay.
You eventually have to fix it painfully or just accept perpetual mediocrity.
And the high cost of not giving feedback.
Systematically crappy company performance. People can't improve weaknesses they don't even know they have.
He talks about management quality assurance, checking the health of management throughout the employee life cycle, recruiting, hiring, training, performance, retention.
And he clarifies the role of HR. They can't build the culture alone.
But they're the critical function that can tell you when managers aren't performing effectively. They need to be trusted partners, not just police.
Minimizing politics within a company, another huge challenge he addresses. Identifying hiring people with the right kind of ambition as key.
And he borrows Andy Grove's definition for that. The right kind of ambition is for the company's success. Your personal success is a byproduct.
The wrong kind is ambition for personal success, regardless of the company's outcome.
He suggests screening for this by listening. Is it always the me prism versus the team prism?
Does someone use my for company failures? My team is the goal. Do they talk about work as just a play or building out my resume?
He uses Mark Cranny as an example of someone who genuinely only wanted to talk about how his team won. That's the right kind.
Another tactic for minimizing politics: build strict, formal processes for politically sensitive stuff.
Performance reviews, compensation, org design, territory assignments, promotions. Ad hoc processes are just vulnerable to gaming and politics.
He notes that lacking a formal promotion process leads to resentment, undermining, people copying political behavior.
And this connects to his law of crappy people. In the absence of clear standards, the performance level at any given title will eventually converge to that of the worst person with that title.
Because others see them and benchmark down if they can have that title.
Exactly. It's a bit different from the Peter principle, which is about promoting to incompetence. This is about the bar lowering.
Interesting. He also compares Andreessen's view on titles use high titles, they're cheap, versus Zuckerberg's.
Right. Zuckerberg uses deliberately low titles for consistent leveling, forcing managers to internalize the system. Both are conscious strategic choices.
Horowitz repeatedly stresses, you learn to be a CEO by being a CEO.
You'll face tasks you have no idea how to do, but everyone expects you to know.
The stress is immense. You're responsible for everything.
And this stress can lead to two common mistakes: losing perspective.
And failing to make critical decisions. Getting paralyzed.
His advice for staying grounded: focus on the road, not the wall.
Meaning focus on where you need to go, not on the fear that makes you want to crash.
He identifies CEO types too. Ones are innovators, comfortable with complexity, decisive.
Twos make things run well, prefer clear goals, execution-focused.
Most founding CEOs are ones, he says, and they benefit greatly from having twos or functional ones on staff.
Too many ones can lead to conflict and confusion, right? Everyone trying to innovate in different directions.
Exactly. He also details 3 key leadership attributes he's observed.
First, the Steve Jobs attribute.
The ability to articulate such a compelling vision people follow, even when it makes no financial sense, like staying at NXT or Apple when they were nearly bankrupt.
Second, the Bill Campbell attribute.
Genuinely caring about your people, having their best interests at heart. Smart people won't work for selfish leaders long term.
And third, The Andy Grove attribute.
Pure competence. The ability to actually achieve the vision through relentless refinement of your craft. Grove wrote management books, taught classes, always improving.
He also makes this crucial distinction between the peacetime CEO and the wartime CEO.
Very different mentalities, very different techniques needed. Applying the wrong one can be disastrous.
He gives lots of contrasts. Protocol, focus, recruiting, culture, contingency planning, buy-in, goals, training, rules.
Even whether profanity is appropriate differs between peacetime and wartime leadership. You have to know which battle you're fighting.
On management techniques, he critiques the classic shit sandwich for giving feedback.
Compliment, criticism, compliment. He says it works, maybe with very junior people.
But it's too formal, lacks authenticity. Senior execs see it coming a mile away.
His quote, "Spare me the compliment, just get to the point."
He offers keys to effective feedback instead. Move beyond formulas. Be authentic, clear, specific, direct.
Avoid judgment, include positive and negative, listen to their response, and always, always prepare beforehand.
He breaks down the challenge of knowing what to do as a leader into two main facets.
Strategy and decision-making.
Strategy, he says, is basically the same thing as the company's story.
The CEO is the keeper of that vision and story, constantly articulating why the company exists, why anyone should care, employees, customers, investors.
This story provides context, aligns interests, enables decisions, motivates everyone. It's the foundation.
And decision-making is the other primary job, measured by speed and quality.
Requires intelligence, logic, and courage. He really emphasizes courage.
Because decisions are almost always made with incomplete information, and the hardest, most important ones are often unpopular. You need the guts to make the call.
He shares a pretty stressful anecdote about the BMC acquisition audit, a dispute over accounting for a specific CA clause with Ernst & Young's national office.
It really highlights dealing with these rigid outside forces. E&Y was unbending, refused to consider intent or business impact.
Threatened to derail the entire $1.6 billion deal over this accounting point, just saying, we don't care, that's what you have to do.
Shows how external factors and bureaucracy can add immense pressure, even at the finish line.
He defines different types of accountability, too, for effort.
Gotta check. People are giving world-class effort.
For promises.
Critical for execution, but complexity matters. Was it a reasonable promise?
And for results. The hardest one.
Requires looking beyond just the numbers. How were they achieved? What were the factors involved?
And he cautions against holding people too tightly accountable for results in innovative fields. You need to balance it.
Right. Balance accountability with encouraging creative risk-taking. He says, the difference between being mediocre and magical is often the difference between letting people take creative risk and holding them too tightly accountable.
Accountability is vital, but it's not the only thing. He shares one of the most unique management techniques I've ever heard of. He calls it the Freaky Friday management technique.
Seriously?
Like the movie. Exactly. He used it to resolve conflict between warring teams like customer support and sales engineering.
He literally switched their heads. Made the head of support the acting head of sales engineering.
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Yep. The logic was, like the movie, they kept their own minds and perspectives, but got a new body, new team, new challenges.
Forced them to quickly understand the pressures and realities the other side faced every day.
And the result was incredibly fast. Within a week, they diagnosed the core issues causing the friction.
And implemented processes that led to harmonious, effective work between the teams. Fix the problem.
He calls the movie perhaps the most insightful management training film ever made. He gives advice on a really delicate situation, setting tough expectations with a great, loyal executive, someone who helped build the company but might be outgrowing their role as it scales.
How do you handle that without destroying morale or losing a valuable person?
You have to be clear, honest. They're doing great work now, but the job requirements will change significantly as the company grows.
And they will, like everyone else, including the CEO, be reevaluated for that new, different job later.
It's not about their past performance or loyalty. It's just the reality of rapid growth that everyone has to face. Tough conversation, but necessary. Finally, he tackles the complex decision of when to sell the company, separating the logical and emotional parts.
Logically, he offers a pretty simple rule of thumb. If you're very early in a very large market and you have a good chance of becoming number one,
like Google felt early on,
then you generally shouldn't sell. Nobody can afford your potential value.
But if either of those conditions is false, maybe the market isn't that big, or you're clearly not going to be number one.
Like Pointcast, whose market collapsed, then you should strongly consider selling.
He uses Opsware as the example. Didn't sell early, believed in the market and their potential.
But did sell later for $1.6 billion to HP when the market landscape had changed and the opportunity felt right.
Emotionally, though, it's that conflict, selling out your dream versus financial independence for you and your team.
He suggests ways to meet the emotional bias. Pay the CEO a market rate salary so the decision isn't driven by personal finances.
And be explicit with the company. The decision is about the company's long-term optimal outcome, not about the founder's personal feelings. The book ends by laying out the inspiration for founding Andreessen Horowitz, their VC firm.
Came from this paradox, Horowitz observed. Technical founders constantly had to prove they could run companies.
While professional CEOs were often just assumed capable, regardless of their track record building from scratch.
Their goal was to build a firm specifically designed to help technical founders succeed, address the deficits they often faced.
Like the CEO skill set management, org design, sales.
And the CEO network connections to execs, customers, press, investors.
They modeled their systematic network, the franchise, after Michael Irvitz's creative artists agency, CAA.
Building this deep grid of specialists connecting clients, founders to opportunities.
And interestingly, they intentionally launched with a big splash, counter-programming the usual quiet VC approach.
To immediately signal they were different, founder-focused.
The name was easy to use their own names, people knew them. The nickname A16Zs.
Coined as just a simple way to refer to it. A followed by 16 letters followed by Z, like programming abbreviations. I-18N for internationalization.
Makes sense. So that's our deep dive into these excerpts from Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing About Hard Things. We've traced his journey from that shy kid in Berkeley through the just brutal fight for survival at LoudCloud and Opsware.
Pulling out those often counterintuitive lessons on leadership people navigating crisis.
It's so clear that building a company is incredibly difficult, filled with what he calls the struggle.
Yeah, there's no magic formula, just messy reality. No easy answers.
But the power of the book and what we hope you take away from this deep dive is that true leadership isn't about avoiding those hard things. It can't be.
It's about how you face them. With courage, honesty, a relentless focus on your people.
And that ability to make the best move you can when there are simply no good ones left.
And if there's one lesson that really encapsulates the necessary, sometimes frustrating, but ultimately crucial work of building a great company, it might just be this one.
Which one's that?
Being too busy to train is the moral equivalent of being too hungry to eat.
Right. It sounds simple, but it's the kind of fundamental truth that makes all the difference when things inevitably get hard.
Thanks for listening. Visit our library and subscribe below for more book summaries. This has been a Sprint Reads production.